Good morning and a warm welcome to the 5th meeting of the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee in 2026. Our first agenda item is to agree to take agenda item 3 in private and also agree to consider the draft report and the legal mechanism for an independence referendum inquiry in private at a future meeting. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Our next agenda item is to take evidence from Creative Scotland on the draft budget 2026-27 and welcome to committee Ian Munro, Chief Executive, and Alistair Evans, Director of Strategy and Planning, both of Creative Scotland. Welcome to you both, and can I move straight to questions from the committee? I would like to begin with a review of Creative Scotland, the report that was published in November. And the committee took evidence from yourself, Mr Munro, and the Vice Chair of the review in December. No, sorry, the Chair of the and the Vice Chair of the review in December. And I wanted to ask Mr Munro if you can provide detail as to how the findings of the review are being implemented and what changes have been made within Creative Scotland following the review.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you. So we've welcomed the review, and we're always open to feedback, and the approach that we take with these things is to embrace the way in which the review has conducted itself and the report itself. There is a lot in it, and a lot of good ideas and suggestions and feedback. And the approach that we take with our audit work that we do is to embrace it, like I say, and this is another version of that. We understand that it was a tight piece of work in terms of the review and the way it was conducted and so on, but the feedback is undoubtedly welcome in terms of the pointers it's giving us to improve our organisation for the future. So there are a range of things within it. You'll have seen 36 recommendations, and 30 of them are directly for Creative Scotland. The other 6 in a broader conversation with Scottish Government and others to be finalised. But we are keen to move quickly on things and have already started to address some of the simple points that are about openness and transparency. We've been doing work on our website, opening all of that up. We've been doing a lot of thinking in relation to the recommendations themselves, and we've had the opportunity to discuss those with the Scottish Government and with the lead of the Secretariat for the review, and indeed with the review chair herself, who came to our board meeting on the 19th of December. We've done a lot of deep dive work with the senior leadership team in Creative Scotland to understand the recommendations and the report itself, and will be taken forward into our board meeting, which, following the committee evidence session today, takes place for the rest of today, to understand with the board how we're going to move forward on implementation and be able to talk about that as soon as we're able to. Some of it will take a wee bit longer. Some of the recommendations relate to work that was already in train or being planned for. Things like a refresh of our strategy, things like a reform of our structures to ensure that we are fit for purpose going forward. So there's a lot for us to digest and progress, but we are absolutely committed to being able to do that. What we have done is seen a pattern in the recommendations that is born from the structure of the review, but we've identified 4 strategic areas that the recommendations cluster themselves underneath, and some of them are speaking to multiple of these headings. So the 4 areas are around strategy. The second one is around our target operating model. The third one is around governance and data and performance, and the fourth is around relationships and partnerships. So we're looking at actions to respond to the report and the recommendations under those 4 areas. And as I say, some of them will speak to multiple dimensions of the 4 areas. So we've done quite a lot of analysis and consideration. And as I say, we're taking it very seriously, and we'll move quickly on some of it and take time with others to understand how we can move forward on some of the ones that are a bit wider than just Creative Scotland. Yeah.
Thank you. In our SPICE briefing for today, there is a table in one of the areas that we've talked about a lot over the years, but now are implementing in terms of multi-year funding. And it's a table that shows by local authority per capita spending from multi-year funding. And there's quite a disparity in provision across the country. On the table, the City of Edinburgh, which you would probably expect to be top, per capita it's £52.47. But when you go to the bottom of that table, North Lanarkshire, where my constituency is, it's 17 pence per capita. And below that, Clackmannanshire, East Renfrewshire, Midlothian, Western Bartonshire receive no per capita funding from that multi-year funding project initiative. Do you think there's a problem with equity across Scotland? And notwithstanding the cities generally have most of the cultural activity, is Creative Scotland concerned that there are patches in the country which don't seem to have the opportunity to secure multi-year funding because lack of opportunity, lack of engagement, lack of cultural activity in those areas, particularly since they tend to be those of highest multiple deprivation?
So we pay close attention to the variety of data sources. I think it's acknowledged in the SPICE briefing as well that the per capita measure is an imperfect one, but it is symbolic of something, and I think we recognise that. A bit of context, the multi-year programme, like most of the programmes that we run, are open access funding, so it's born from demand within the area. But we do recognise that there are areas which, from those data sources, appear underserved. Bit of context, the geographic base location of organisations isn't always the area of impact solely. So many of the organisations that we fund through multi-year funding reach out to, into and across multiple local authority areas and the geography of Scotland, and indeed internationally. But nonetheless, we do recognise that we want to do more in terms of capacity building within individual areas, which is why we have programmes like the Place Partnership work, which is to specifically target in an immersive way with investment, the capacity building in different local authority areas to build up the confidence, to build up the infrastructure, to build up the partnerships and networks that can enable more to come from these areas in terms of creative ambition and opportunities to access the other funds that we run. So multi-year is only one dimension of that, but we do pay very close attention to it. We also have conversations with other national, given that we're a national lottery distributor, with other national lottery distributors in Scotland to understand where we can coalesce around opportunities for different geographic areas on that capacity building. And those are ongoing conversations, but we do pay close attention, like I say, to it. Alistair, do you want to add anything in place?
Yeah, I might answer the question that is in the SPICE briefing, which is, where are the organisations that work nationally? So 40 of them are in Edinburgh and 39 in Glasgow, so you see that weighting there. So they are national organisations, but they're headquartered in Edinburgh, Glasgow, but also sector development organisations that work across the country, and even, for example, Tracks working in traditional arts with huge impact right across Scotland, headquartered in Edinburgh. It is only multi-year there. The success rates are better across the piece, and we publish that between 31 and 68 across the local authorities percentage-wise, with Stirling actually highest. And but that doesn't mean we would not recognise this as being something that we can work on. And as Ian says, it very much gives a sense of where we can do development work. Clackmannanshire is there towards the bottom of the list, for example, one of our newer place partnerships where we're working with local authority and other local organisations on a culture strategy. So it is helpful in that respect. And the ones that you mention, I think across the 5 of them we had one application to multi-year, which is why they see themselves there. So building capacity and infrastructure capability in those areas is important for us.
Of concern, and I look to see developments in that area, particularly since a lot of these areas have excellent colleges, many of whom are doing creative industry-based courses, arts, dancing, screen, all of these areas. So perhaps that's something to consider going forward about the entrepreneurial output from that in the local areas. But I'll move on to questions from the committee. Mr Bibby.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. I wanted to ask you about the recent announcement of the closure of the Contemporary Centre for Arts in Glasgow. Obviously, there's real concern about the impact that that's going to have in terms of the cultural ecosystem, not just at Glasgow, but a much wider area. What discussions have there been between Creative Scotland about saving this cultural asset?
So the challenges of the CCA have been well reported for some time, and through the relationships that we have with organisations, where organisations are exhibiting or expressing fragilities, that we bring them into a closer form of contact with us. That would be the case for CCA in this instance. We've been supporting them to reform from within the organisation and enable them to bring in external expertise to progress that work. Unfortunately, over the course of the last year, that hasn't proven to be successful, and increasingly over that period, as the fragilities of the organisation deepened, we have remained in close contact with them in conjunction with other partners to understand what those challenges are and what they were planning to do about them. Just to be absolutely clear, we do not run these organisations. We don't police or regulate them, but we do have clearly a scrutiny through the funding relationship that we have with them. And we want to support such an important organisation being able to find a pathway through some of these challenges, which is what we've been trying to, in conjunction with other partners, to enable them to do. It increasingly became apparent as the course of the last few months in particular have played out, that the financial fragilities, the governance fragilities and the leadership fragilities of the organisation, combined with external factors, have all coalesced, and ultimately the organisation itself realised that it was insolvent and notified us of that, and then it has been playing out publicly since last week. So in terms of saving the organisation is technically in real terms insolvent and is moving to liquidation. That's a decision taken by the board of the CCA, as I say, because we don't run it. And because of those circumstances, it's important for us as guardians of public funding to understand that being able to continue to invest in that scenario is not viable. So unfortunately that is what is now progressing based on the decision by the board of CCA.
So obviously there's a decision to fold the organisation, but there's also obviously real concerns about the need to save jobs, people losing their jobs as a result of this, and also saving the building, the cultural asset. And I think it's very important that every action is taken necessary to try and save those jobs and save the building as an asset. I met, and I'm sure a number of members have met this week, the Scottish Contemporary Arts Network, which are exhibiting in the Parliament, and they have kind of rightly talked about the importance that the CCA has in terms of the cultural ecosystem in Glasgow and across Scotland. You mentioned the discussions that there's been prior to this decision from between Creative Scotland and the organisations. What discussions have you had with the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Government about this? Would Creative Scotland be willing to you know, convene a meeting or take part in a meeting with the Scottish Government, Creative Scotland, other interested parties to try and find a route to saving this asset and saving jobs in the sector in Glasgow?
So I mean, we are clearly very concerned about the situation, very disappointed that this is what is happening, and the ramifications that for the people and for those who use the building and love that building. We do own the building, and we've said very publicly that it is our intention to ensure that we work appropriately through this complex situation to work with others to find a pathway through that enables the building 350 Sauchiehall Street to reopen. The current company is insolvent and is going into liquidation. That is a decision taken by the board. That's a very particular legal, technical process that is being progressed. And the responsibilities for that lie with an insolvency practitioner and the remaining trustees of the board of CCA. What we're committed to is finding a way with others to enable the re-emergence of the building at CCA, at Sauchiehall Street, to come back into use as a cultural asset, key for the city, but importantly for Scotland too. And that's what we're going to be focusing our attentions on to enable that to happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Harvey, I think you wanted to follow with my first question.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Good morning. I did want to pursue questions on the same issue. You'll appreciate as a Glasgow MSP, but also, you know, in my capacity on the committee, we're looking at the budget for 26-27 right now, and the budget for 26-27 has nearly 1.3 million allocated for the CCA. So you're both the landlord, the owner of the building, and you have money allocated to support the building. It does seem to me that, notwithstanding the failure of the CCA as an organisation, you're in a very strong position, actually, to move forward and to ensure that we can see the facility, the building, brought back to life in some form or other as rapidly as possible. I'd be really concerned if a post-mortem on the CCA as an organisation ended up delaying progress on bringing the building back into use in some capacity. It seems to me that the best thing that we could do quickly is to reach out to the staff who've lost their jobs and gauge their interest and their capacity in establishing a new worker-led organisation that would retain the skills and the experience that group of people have, and that would be the fastest way to bring back to life and back to the cultural life of our city, the CCA or its successor. Is that something you've explored doing? And with the budget that's allocated for 26-27, be able to enable a rapid pathway to that?
So the budget that is committed in the name of the now former CCA company remains held, and it will be a factor in enabling us to move forward. We want to do that as quickly as possible, but appropriately through the legal processes that are taking place. But we're not being held by, to use your words, a post-mortem of the situation. I think we need to, because we've been in contact with the organisation, we've got an understanding of what has been happening. So, as I've said, we're very much focused now on what next, and to doing that appropriately with others. It's fair to say that we've had a lot of interest come forward in terms of the building, its reopening, and ideas around that, and we need to engage with that at the appropriate time. We won't be able to rush into anything, because what's really important here is to get something with solid foundations, confidently in a position to reopen for the long term. So you're absolutely right. We are a key partner in enabling that to happen. We won't be doing it ourselves in terms of the company to run the building, but procuring the right organisation with the right governance and business plans to enable that to move forward is something that we'll be exploring. We're not there yet. I mean, we've got a conversation today with the board of Creative Scotland about these next steps. Okay. And once we've been considering that, we'll have ideas about how we want to approach the next steps.
As well as funding, as I understand it, you've provided the building at effectively a peppercorn rent to the organisation. Is that still part of the, if you like, the offer of what would be available to a successor organisation? It's
an option. I mean, this is a blank sheet of paper with lots of roots and tentacles into that past that we can draw on. But it's an option. I can't say with confidence yet what exactly is going to happen, but you have our commitment that we are seeking to find the route through on this to see the reopening as soon as possible.
Okay. I'm sure you'll keep the committee updated with the results or the progress on making something like this happen. Can I just finally ask for an assurance that at your meeting with the board to discuss this, you will raise the possibility of the staff who've just lost their jobs being directly involved in that discussion, and that you would be able to reach out to them to explore at least the possibility that they would have a role in whatever comes forward next?
I will ensure that the board understand the point that you've made in the conversations that we have this afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Halker-Johnson.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Just to go back very quickly to the multi-year funding question. Unusually, for me, I can see a map here that shows the Highlands and Islands area that I represent actually doing quite well out of this. And obviously, you've also highlighted that the cities, those areas where perhaps they're based, the organisations are based, also do well. You suggested that there was, if you actually took a map perhaps of impact, it would be slightly different. I take it you can provide that map of showing the impact, and you can provide that detail of where the impact of your funding goes.
It's hard to visualise, but a form of it, yes. We can absolutely do it in writing. I mean, I think but a visualisation of it is something that we can take away and understand.
You also talk about partnerships and particularly working with local government. One of the areas that we had concerns about last week was that due to the pressures on local government funding, that then causes pressures in terms of relationships with museums and the like. Are you concerned that these partnerships that you're looking to promote are going to be impacted by those wider funding issues?
So we've spoken before at the committee about our concerns about local government position and the importance of local government as a key partner in the local authority areas to partner with us on the best outcomes for local cultural provision, particularly through the organisations, but also the people that are in these different areas. So as we monitor very closely and engage right across the country with 32 local authorities in different ways. But increasingly we are concerned about the extent to which local government funding is under such pressure that we're now starting to see a non-statutory service like culture being cut, and the prospect of up to 100% cuts applying in some instances. That's deeply worrying in and of itself, but it does risk to undermine the good progress that we've been able to pass through multi-year funding, for example, in particular, due to the funding from the Scottish Government, that the outcomes of that become eroded as a result of reductions in budget income elsewhere. Our multi-year funding is it's foundational for organisations in so many ways. It's just over a quarter of turnover of these organisations on average, which means they are reliant on around 3/4 of their turnover from others, including local government particularly, as well as earned income from ticket sales and so on, bar catering and retail.
Sorry, and some of the areas, I mean, one of the areas that has been highlighted in the briefing was the Youth Music Initiative, planned increase up to 10 million, 0.2 million of an increase. Again, we've all heard stories of local government, local schools not being able to provide things like musical tuition, instrument tuition. How does that impact on the initiatives that you're doing? Are you feeling you've got to step in more often to ensure that perhaps just the status quo in terms of opportunity is maintained?
So the Youth Music Initiative has a large component of it which is targeted funding for local authorities, all 32 local authorities. And there's a programme that runs annually to understand the plans and ambitions from formula fund allocation to each individual local authority about what the local authority wants to do with that, and then we sign it off and it gets delivered through the school year, the academic year. It's one part of provision. Instrumental music tuition is another. We're not directly responsible for that. That's direct with local authorities. And there's also a recognition of the formal music education sector and the informal music education sector that takes place in community clubs and so on beyond school itself. So there's quite a layering in there. What we are seeing is the pressures translating through the formula fund in particular, in a way that we, again, monitor very quickly to understand how we can ensure that we get maximum impact from that investment in local authority areas. But the local ecology is really important to understand how all these elements knit together, and the networks in play in local authority areas are very important. There is an increasing fragility in local government as well, where we see fewer and fewer cultural strategies locally and fewer specialist local government staff with cultural expertise that can be part of the infrastructure of support to make sure that we're joined up with them to get maximum impact and value. But undoubtedly, it's still, 23 years on, Youth Music Initiative is still very much an important part of provision within all of the local authority areas. Yeah.
Okay. Just, I'm sorry, I'm going to dot around a little bit. There's some areas that I want to kind of particularly cover. One of the parts of the review was that said that Creative Scotland needs to improve its long-term planning. Implications one may take is that the organisation is too short-term in its approach. And the report noted that you didn't have a transformation plan to set out how the organisation will improve. Is that something we've touched briefly on it in the Cavida's questions? Where are you with that? Can you give us any kind of further detail?
So the organisation is one which learning and reflection on feedback is built into how we operate. And we did a lot of transformation work early in my tenure, just pre-pandemic, that stood us in good stead for the pandemic delivery and subsequently. But we have known that we've wanted to continue to build on that work. So we've never had we've been doing organisational development work, and we're now picking up that again more fulsomely through, for example, things like the target operating model. But the way in which we respond to the review will be, in effect, become an action plan that we can respond to the review with, yes, but actually will be contributing to the way in which we are able to express the change in the organisation that we'll be driving forward with.
So there'll be an action plan, but not a transformation plan. But I mean, you hope it'll cover the same things.
It will achieve the same outcomes in terms of ensuring that we are looking to the future and make ourselves as fit for purpose as possible to enable that future to be delivered to the best effect. Yeah.
Okay. Just kind of going on in terms of the leadership aspect, I mean, you'll appreciate, and I'm not trying to make comparisons, just to be very, very clear, but we've obviously been dealing with the issues around historic environment Scotland and some of the concerns that have been raised there. Again, the review, Creative Scotland's governance is difficult to navigate and lacks transparency, although minutes from board meetings and some committee meetings are available online and others are not. Can you comment on that, give us any update and improvements, your thoughts?
Yeah. So governance as a whole, we get audited on this, and there have been no issues, material issues raised within our governance audits. We always get very strong audits. So the review reflections are interesting and important. The point about transparency, absolutely accept, and we will want to do more in opening up the organisation. I referred to the convener's question with an example of something that we're already doing, which is our website as being a key interface for people to see and understand inside the organisation. But we'll also be looking at how we do more in-person engagement and with the board particularly, also to being part of that, so that we can open up the organisation in multiple different ways, in writing, through our channels and in person. So we understand what the review are reflecting on there, and we accept that there is more that we can and want to do in terms of that openness and transparency.
And if I can widen it out to kind of to the wider oversight, I mean, one of the issues that was raised, has been repeatedly raised, has been the opportunities for the Cabinet Secretary to meet with the board. Has the Cabinet Secretary met with the Creative Scotland board or attended board meetings? Have there been invites to do so? Has there been requests from him to do so?
Yes, that has happened. I would need to look back to give more detail on that, but what I can say beyond that is that the Chair of Creative Scotland, Robert Wilson, and I have regular meetings with the Cabinet Secretary. They're formal meetings that take place at least quarterly. But in between times, we, of course, not only engaging with the officials, we do have interactions with the Cabinet Secretary in different settings and forums. So multiple opportunities, but yes, the Cabinet Secretary has been to the
I think
board
the Cabinet Secretary has suggested previously that he has met with the board around funding issues. Have there been other meetings with the board that you're aware of?
I mean, funding has been a key subject, but the strategic conversations with the Cabinet Secretary, particularly around things like multi-year funding, you know, these are big parts of a transformation programme, a change programme that's born out of review work that we've done ourselves in the past. These are all subject matters that are part of the conversations with the Cabinet Secretary that will be ongoing and necessarily should.
Okay, and just my last question, if that's right, because I'm conscious of time. Again, dotting around a little bit, but again in the report, it was also planned to draw down 10 million from the reserves built up from lottery income. Can you tell us what the reserves are total at the moment?
Yeah, 3.4 million.
3.4 million.
Currently, yeah. So that plan that's reflected in the papers is what has been playing out. And technical point. They're not reserves. It's a national lottery balance. It's an accounting point, but just to be absolutely clear about it, but we do have 3.4 million that's in a national lottery balance that is what is being referred to there. Yeah.
So that 10 million is a considerable part of that?
Yeah, but there was a plan for it, which is now being enacted, which was stepping us through the multi-year arrangements. So we're down now at 3.4 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I bring in Mr. Kerr?
Yeah, so, I mean, as an organisation, according to the Spice briefing, your budget for the coming year is going to increase against the budget you were allocated a year ago. 26% increase. That's quite a lot of increase. And in cash terms, compared with the autumn budget revision figures for the current budget year, it's 13% in cash terms. So of the 101 million that you're expected to get, how much of that is ring-fenced?
Yeah. So it's 111 million.
Was 111?
Yeah.
I beg your pardon, I misread that.
Yeah.
No, according to this it's 101, but okay, I take your word, 111, yeah.
But significant growth, and yes, thank you to the Scottish Government for honouring the commitment from last year to see that further increase for multi-year funding in particular. So all of the elements of the budget that we get from the Scottish Government are designated for specific purposes. We are heavily involved in shaping the way in which those funds are used, but there are essentially 6 things that we get funding from the Scottish Government to do, which I can run through if I can remember them off the top of my head. So there's multi-year funding. There's,
Can you say which proportion of the 111 goes with each of these headings?
if you give me 2 seconds, I will do that. So these are all things that we'll be publishing again in our annual plan.
Yeah.
So you'll see the breakdown. Apologies, I do have it here.
That's okay.
So it's 74 million. Whilst I'm flicking, I'll do what I can remember.
Yeah.
74 million. Have you got it? I must have known. 74 million for multi-year funding.
Of the 110.
Of the 111, yeah.
111, sorry. I keep getting my number wrong.
Sorry, here it is. I've got it. 74 million and 10.9 for screen.
That's ring-fenced, yeah.
Yep. Sorry, 11.25 with the growth actually is for screen.
Right.
YMI is 9.785. We have festivals. Sorry, forgive me. Can I rewind?
Yes, of course.
I've looked at the wrong column.
That's okay.
So 74 million for multi-year funding.
Yep.
Just short of 10 million for YMI. 12 million for screen. 6 million for festivals. 4 million for Culture Collective, and for nearly 5 million contribution towards our overhead. So they are the component parts of the 111 million.
So it's pretty much all accounted for, isn't it?
Yes.
In terms of the ring fencing.
Yes.
What does that mean in terms of additional money that might go to independent artists, for example? Is that going up?
So-
I don't have the relative figures to compare.
So all of our flexibility lies in our other income stream, which is from the National Lottery as a distributor.
Right. So it's National Lottery money we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So all of our open access funding, including support for individual artists, as well as project funding for organisations, all our targeted development work,
Yeah.
international work, further money for screen, all of that comes from, and the contribution to our overhead comes from our National Lottery funding. So, as I say, those elements from the 111 million, we help, of course, to shape and we are deliver them.
Yeah.
But the flexibility within them
Pretty limited.
is limited,
Yeah.
which is why we rely on our National Lottery income to be able to address the other development needs that we have in the role that we want to
So
fulfil.
not a lot of room for manoeuvre with the grant money then, in general terms. You know that under the Public Services Reform Scotland Act 2010, Section 40, it says specifically that ministers may not give directions so far as relating to artistic or cultural judgment in respect of the exercise of Creative Scotland's functions under Section 37, etc., etc. So my question to you is, and this is based on the budget information that we were given as MSPs, I've got a very straightforward question, which is, have you received any direction, general or specific, from ministers or officials that you believe comes close to artistic or cultural judgment? And if so, how did you respond?
No. I think it's well understood that there's a separation, given we are arm's length from government. As I say, we understand these are, to all intents and purposes, restricted funds from government, but we inform and influence the shape and are responsible for the delivery and are accountable for the delivery of those. But absolutely, the government there's no government direction, although government are clearly kept informed about the delivery of the funds.
It's just in the level 4 spreadsheet for the budget. It had some very specific line items, which would, I think, have suggested that there was some form of direction from Scottish ministers, or it might have suggested there was. Maybe the wording was clumsy. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Well, no. I thought I might have a sense of it, but please...
so specifically, it said, quote, to support growth of screen sector, and this is in relation to the Screen Scotland level 4 spreadsheet line. It said to support growth of screen sector and reach goal of 1 billion GVA by 2030, which was subsequently changed. It was edited. And the Cabinet Secretary was upfront with the committee and said officials were concerned that the text against Screen Scotland funding lines may suggest the government is directing Screen Scotland as to how to deploy their grant and aid funding. And that's why I'm asking, because language can often reveal a lot, and I'm just wanting to test that the provisions of Section 40 are being adhered to in your experience, and whether you've ever come across a situation where you had to respond to Scottish ministers making a artistic or cultural judgment in terms of funding.
Yeah. So that is a statement that accords with the intent that we've got set out in the Screen Scotland strategy. It's not, I don't interpret that at all as direction over artistic judgment. It's essentially saying that the government are keen to support the delivery of Screen Scotland strategy to deliver the 1 billion net GVA by the end of 2031. That is not crossing a line in the way in which that actually materially then translates into the work that we do.
And what about the £500,000 for film houses in Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen?
So that one hasn't passed to us, and I know there's been much debate on that. That's not in anything that we have had from our conversations with government yet.
But you're aware that that's what it said at the level in the level
Yes.
4 spreadsheet,
Yeah.
which is quite directional in terms of
Yeah.
spending, yeah?
But that's not our
not
understanding of what is actually happening. Yeah.
All right, okay. So, moving on then, in relation to the transparency issue that Jamie Halcrow-Johnson has raised, which is well covered in the review, there's a lot of commentary about the lack of transparency. Can I ask you specifically, given time limitations, about the issues of transparency, consistency and fairness around funding decisions, which is on page 42 of the review? It's very specific in its criticisms of the lack of transparency. Now, you've had the report for a while. What concrete changes will you be making in terms of funding decisions, of which there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, in front of the committee? What specific changes will you make to meet the need for greater transparency, consistency and fairness of funding decisions?
Yeah. So what the report doesn't fully reflect is that for many of the funds that we operate, external sector specialists are involved alongside us in making those decisions. So there's a whole range of funds, Touring Fund, the Expo funds for festivals and so on, which involve those external panel members with us. We're accountable for the decisions, but we absolutely want to involve beyond us those specialists to have a view on what should be supported. And we publish that. There is more that I think we can do to make sure that is understood, and also particularly I think the commentary is around the open funds. So we're going to be looking at that as we reform the open funds, which is part of the work plan that we already had in train. We'll be doing that over the course of this year. We'll be looking at how we reflect on the point from the review about transparency. But we already do have a lot of external input into decision making, and that is published and well understood about who's been involved in those decisions. But we'll look at it more.
But do you accept the review's conclusions on page 42 about transparency, consistency and fairness? Do you actually do you accept them as a valid critique of the current state of things?
Yes, we understand them, and we accept that we can do more to ensure that the openness, transparency and fairness is evident and accountable. So
It's just that obviously you've mounted a pretty good defence of the status quo in response to my first question, and I suppose and I hope other members of the committee might be interested to see what changes you make in order to respond to the review's observations and critiques. Specifically, again on page 42, 45, 42 I think it is, it talks about panel membership, that there's the transparency would be helped if you published who exactly was on the panels that are making these decisions. Is that something that you can do soon, immediately, publishing the membership of the panels?
So this is what I'm referring to.
Yes.
So the panels of decision makers often involve external experts from the sector, as well as partners and Creative Scotland staff. And we already publish a lot of that. I think there is more to do to make that more prominent, but particularly in relation to the open funds. As we redesign those, we'll be looking at ensuring that is more evident, and I accept the point that is being made about a desire to see that, and we'll ensure we deliver against it.
Well, okay, it's just, I mean, obviously the review landed in a place where you say you're doing some of that, but that's not the impression that one would get reading the review. There's a call for some pretty fundamental transparency in the review, and I will be interested to see how you actually respond to that in practice. I hear what you're saying about what you currently do, but clearly that's what you were doing when the review was conducted, and the outcome of the review is a critique of that says you can do a lot more.
Which we understand and accept. I'm just making sure in addressing your question that there's an understanding that we do some of it, and I'm not seeking to defend the status quo. Absolutely, as I said, this is about feedback to enable us to reflect on how we can continue to improve and get better to address the point about transparency.
And at a time when you're now in receipt of 111 million pounds, not 101 million pounds of public money, the importance of the implementation of these process and procedural related the feedback in relation to those is pretty critical, because having commissioned the review, the government, I hope, and certainly this committee, I presume, in whatever future shape it may be in, will have a close interest in seeing that something happens, rather than it just being another one of those reviews that ends up, being consigned to the pile of reviews that have been conducted by this government and this Parliament, and nothing changes.
That's not how we're approaching it.
That's not your intent.
No, it's absolutely right from the convener's question. I hope you understand that we embrace this and we want to respond to it proactively, positively, and for that change to be evident incrementally and increasingly as we work through the recommendations. But we take that point particularly very seriously.
And you take on board the point in the review about the capabilities of the leadership of Creative Scotland, because they are also quite pointed, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. But we've got a leadership with really good people. What this is about is ensuring that we are taking care of the future as part of the way in which we can strengthen ourselves, building on the current strengths of Creative Scotland, but looking to that future and making sure that we are organised with the right people in the right way to get maximum impact. There is an opportunity through board recruitment, which will be progressing through the course of this year, as part of contributing to that. We've got an excellent board with different disciplines, but we have got scope for up to 5 new board members to be appointed. But just to be absolutely clear, remember, as a public body, these are ministerial appointments run through public appointments. So
Indeed.
We don't have...
you don't have the final say.
Yeah, but nonetheless, we can feed that through our chair's involvement in that process to ensure that we help address part of that point that you've just made.
The feedback in the review.
Pardon?
Address the issues that are raised in the review
Yeah.
about leadership.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. We'll keep a watching brief.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Brown?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just to go back to the Convener's opening question, and the disparity as between different local authority areas, and the Convener mentioned Club Manager, I think what is noticeable as well, West and Bartonshire, two areas of the greatest deprivation in Scotland, received nothing at all in multi-year funding. I'd just be interested to know, probably not the specific detail, because I know it'll probably be hard to recollect, if you give us an idea of how that has developed over the time period of Creative Scotland over the last 16, 17 years. Was there ever a period of bounty for Club Manager, for example, or has it been pretty consistent?
So the different parts of the country, it's worth, because we've got, and again, picking up on Mr Kerr's point about transparency and so on, there's more data, that's a reflection on the review, there's more data that we hold that we can publish and we'll want to publish about understanding the picture, because multi-year is only a singular review. It's an important one, but it's only a singular review. What I would reflect on, however, though, using multi-year and former equivalents of multi-year funding, like RFO funding, for example, we've seen through the capacity building and development work that we do in places, early iterations of multi-year funding covering 18 local authorities, with base locations of organisations, growing to, in the former RFO funding, 21 local authority base locations, to where we are now, which is 28 base locations of organisations through multi-year funding. So it can show, it shows and illustrates in itself the progression and work that is paying dividends, albeit we would all want to see it go faster, to enable organisations to build their capacity locally to access some funding routes. We want to do more of that, and we're committed to do more in that. Club Manager is the one that we're focused on most significantly at the moment in addressing that. But again, in response to Mr Kerr's point earlier, our development activities born from our National Lottery funds, and there's a lot of community-based National Lottery funding through small grants like Awards for All, for example, as well as the place partnerships that are more strategic, and the open funds, which support individual people as artists and as organisations doing project activity in these local areas. But we want to build on that and get a position of strength for these local areas to be able to apply into our funds more than they currently are able. Yeah.
So can I take from that that you're not able to give an account of what the shape of Creative Scotland funding is in Club Manager? Was it 2010 that Creative Scotland came into being?
Yeah.
Yeah. So over the last 6 years, even an impression of what the spend has been like over that period?
Yeah, we can do that. We've got data, and as I say, we can. We'd be keen to publish more of that. One thing, and some of you in your constituency capacities might also be aware that we do local area briefings, which I'm keen for us to do more of, that is able to paint more of that picture, that would not just be about funding, but actually the resources, the networks, the key players and partnerships that exist in different areas of the country. And we monitor those very, very carefully. But we can absolutely look back in the records and understand what that direction has been in different areas over time.
Well, it'd be useful to get that, and also if it's possible to get one for Stirling as well. I represent quite a chunk of Stirling and hope to represent a larger chunk of Stirling after the election. And it'd be interesting to see what the pattern has been there. I see they sit around £2 odds. So I missed £12, which is still below the average per capita, but an awful lot more than nothing at all, as we see in Club Manager. And just to try and understand why those, well, it's hard to judge until I get the information, how those different patterns have emerged. Because for all that you said that you're keeping a close eye on it, we're now 16 years into Creative Scotland and its investment, at least through multi-year funding, is zero in Clackmannanshire. And Clackmannanshire is an area of substantial deprivation. I just find it very hard to understand. It's no consolation to folk in Clackmannanshire to say there are now 28 other local authorities which are receiving funding. They are not, and their need is substantial. Sorry, do you want to comment, Mr. Evans?
I thought you had concluded. I think it's important to note that these tables are for multi-year. So Clackmannanshire, Western Bartonshire, they are receiving funding through other routes. And we can certainly give you a note on the trajectory of that over those 16 years. Clackmannanshire is still a success rate sitting under 40% across all our funds, and that is at the lower end. So they're an area that we're working on through the Place Partnership, as I said, to do that development work in the area with the local authority and others, which builds that soft infrastructure for people to feel confident that they can make compelling cases to us for funding, and over time we can see that starting to happen. For some local authority areas, that may then translate into an application into multi-year, which they might be successful with. But for a small number of local authority areas, they're not there yet. I mean, Stirling's journey actually is fascinating in terms of, City of Culture, plans bringing together people locally, as has happened in other areas, in Paisley and in Dundee at one time as well, around the table, building that local energy around culture as something that can define and help build the story in Stirling. So across all their funds, a good success rate, 68%, brings them up to about £15 per head. So I mean, the logic of that would say they are accessing a number of smaller awards. That might be through schemes like Awards for All that we run with National Lottery Partners. As Ian said, Culture Collective is another route we have into working intensively locally and with artists based in communities. So there's a lot more routes than just multi-year, but we appreciate it's important for local authorities to be seen to have that multi-year funding route as well.
I think it's not just being seen, I think it is the experience of the arts and culture in Clackmannanshire which concerns me. And you've mentioned Stirling, and you would think, certainly I would have thought, that it was relatively vibrant with the creation of Creative Stirling and so on, and some of the activity. It's still well below average. I mean, I have, for multi-year funding, it's £12, as the average is £17. The discrepancy in that table is really quite striking. Can you give me any idea? Obviously, you will provide a kind of pattern over the last 16 years, both for Stirling and Clacks. How many RFOs were there in each of those? I mean, the fact is they're too cheap by Jill, pretty hard to disentangle Clackmannanshire and Stirling in some ways, but how many RFOs were there in those respective local authorities, do you know?
I think we need to come back to you on that question. I don't have that to hand at the moment, but in responding to the trajectory point, we'll be able to answer that for you. I think it's important to... I absolutely hear the point that's being made. Multi-year funding and previously RFO was based on applications to us and the response that we're able to make. What we're talking about is how we work to build the capacity to get the applications to us, as well as the direct applications for project funding and individual funding that takes place in the area. So it's a responsive fund. We, of course, try to take a strategic overview of that, but what we're trying to do is build up the opportunity for organisations to come to us for multi-year funding in mechanisms in the future, through things like Place Partnerships, Culture Collective and the project-based work that we do. So it is only one view. I'm not saying it is perfect by any means, and there's a lot more that we want to be able to do, but a lot of that is about the capacity building in the local area to enable opportunities to come forward.
I suppose my last point would be it is far from perfect. It's about as far from perfect as you can get in relation to Clackmannanshire. But just in giving you a response that it's a responsive organisation, Creative Scotland's got to be a lot more than that. It's got to be somebody that encourages this. Could list the number of people in Clackmannanshire that have no longer make applications to Creative Scotland because they're just beaten down by defeat over the years. They just feel there's no point in doing it anymore. And that's had, in a small local authority, that's had a big effect. So Creative Scotland's got to have a bigger role, surely, than just waiting to see who makes an application or even implied criticism of those that don't have the capacity to make an application. It's got to be a bit more than that if it's to be properly Creative Scotland, representing the whole of Scotland, surely.
Yeah, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying at all that it's a criticism. I'm just reflecting on the way that the open access processes like multi-year work, but we are working strategically with direct intervention into Clackmannanshire, as an example, through things like our place partnerships. Absolutely, with funding investment and time over an extended period of time to engage with local community people, organisations, partners, to help to understand what the needs of that area are and present opportunities to those in that area to access the other funds that we operate. So it's a combination of people coming to us, but us absolutely going into areas to be able to support, encourage and strengthen opportunities for them to enable applications to be made. We would be very happy through that place partnership work to continue with that dialogue, and we do funding fairs around the country. We take part in those as well as part of presenting some of those opportunities, but it's a combination of strategic work.
Those events in Clackmannanshire?
I need to double check, but where they do exist, yes, we absolutely do. But the Clackmannanshire example is an interesting one, because what I'm saying is that we've identified it as a specific area that we want to work with, and we've gone in with expertise and investment to unlock opportunities with people and organisations locally and with partners in order to build that confidence and capacity to access other funding that we can offer, but also to strengthen opportunities locally with local partners and see when the place partnership itself comes to an end that there's an opportunity for that to continue in some way through the legacy of that work. So it's an immersive, very strategic programme that we can illustrate in other parts of the country has worked well as a model, but it's only part of something. I think we are keen to do more, absolutely, but of course in all of this there are resource limitations, but these areas of the country that deserve to have cultural opportunities are very much in our minds as we do the work that we do.
You have quite rightly over the years pushed and pushed for multi-year funding because of the particular advantages of multi-year funding for organisations. For all the work that you said you've done, you've ended up in a situation in Clackmannanshire as well as 3 other local authorities where there is no multi-year funding. So it maybe is time to have a wee look at what's been going on and whether it's the right approach. And it maybe needs a different approach in those authorities. And North Lanarkshire is not much better, 17 pence per head. That kind of discrepancy, I think, should be a very urgent issue for Creative Scotland. But anyway, just a comment. I'll leave it at that, Convener.
Okay, I think the committee would be interested to see where the workshops have taken place across Scotland. I think that would be of interest, certainly to me, I'm sure the rest of the committee. You did mention earlier on about local authorities and the pressures on them for culture budgets and the losing of expertise in those areas. Have you done any analysis or have a feeling about how working with a local authority that does its culture within the local authority differs from dealing with, say, Glasgow Life or other cultural allios across the countries?
So there are many staff engaged in different ways with people, organisations and local authorities across the country. We learn a lot from that, and we are keen to ensure that, again, to a point in the review, that actually that profile, that presence of the work that we do in local authority areas is more prominent and felt. Again, notwithstanding capacity limitations, that we are able to properly ensure that that is consistent over time in different local authority areas. We've done joint pieces of work that have involved Sports Scotland and others that is published in the form of research that has been helping to inform conversations with COSLA, which the Cabinet Secretary also has been in dialogue with, to make sure that the very particular needs of individual areas is understood in order to inform actually through those needs what we can best do to be able to respond to those areas. So, Alistair, do you want to add anything on that? Yeah.
We can certainly, I think we've shared it with you before, Convener, but the research that we did, it would be at the end of 24 that we published it, but that's a look across mapping in the sense of mapping the strategies that are in place and the funding available to culture and leisure services locally. And that gives a sense of where and the extent to which we feel there have been funding reductions. I think SPICE have also published research for you that their numbers somewhere around 29%. I think we think from our research more like 20, but certainly less funding available to culture and leisure services. But I think I've said before at committee, one of the concerns we have is fewer staff to work with who are arts development officers, effectively people who are working in communities with community arts organisations. There are others in that space as well, and we work with many of them. Some of them are funded through multi-year and other routes. But yeah, that is one thing that we've highlighted. I don't have a sense off the top of my head in that research whether you could cut that by those that are ALIOs and those that are local authorities, but it wasn't a key issue in that work that they were picking up that there was a clear difference.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've run over time from what we thought we would be today, so I'm going to have to bring things to a close. Thank you, Mr Munro, Mr Evans, for your attendance this morning, and we'll have a short break between witnesses. Thank you. Thank you. A warm welcome back to committee. Our next evidence session is on the draft budget 2026-27. We're joined by Agnes Robertson, Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Jamie McDougall, Deputy Director of Culture and Historic Environment, Ian Walker, Team Leader Creative Scotland Sponsorship, and Nasta Aja. Sorry, I hope I've got that right, Nastasia. Beaton, Team Leader, National Culture Collections and Capital Projects at the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, you'll have seen the debate, the committee debate on the budget a couple of weeks ago, where I expressed, which I feel is the feeling of all the committee, about our disappointment in the initial response to our budget report and the fact that we didn't get that until after close of business the night before that, and we since have sought further information for you, but I wonder if you want to address why that initial response didn't answer many of the questions raised by the committee.
So first of all, Convener, I would always want to be able to provide you with the information that you require. So heartfelt apologies if we haven't been able to provide you with everything and in relation to that. But as with this evidence session, if there's anything that I'm not or my colleagues are not able to answer, I want to provide the committee with all of that. I understand the usual timescale for Scottish Government response to the committee's pre-budget inquiry report is within 2 weeks of the publication of the draft budget bill. The bill was published on the 13th of January and the letter to the committee from myself was issued on the 20th of January, so that's well within the 2-week deadline. The level of the information in the letter is very much in line with what has been provided in previous years. And we've set out what we will achieve through the draft upcoming budget. There haven't been issues raised in terms of the format or level of detail in past years. Clearly, you wanted to see more, and that's absolutely fine, and we're happy to provide that. So if there are learnings to be taken, Convener, about providing more information, happy to do that.
Thank you. And I must say that we did receive a response from Creative Scotland as well, which went into some detail in what we were looking for. I wonder if I could turn to the additional funding for the arts and culture that has been assigned to Creative Scotland, specifically the multi-year funding programme. However, in our morning session, we were looking at the per capita spend across Scotland from that multi-year funding. And Avi's from the Spice paper for today's meeting shows quite a discrepancy across Scotland. So per capita funding for multi-year funding projects is £52.47 in Edinburgh, but we have 4 local authorities who receive nothing, and North Lanarkshire receives 17 pence per capita from that. And the ones at the bottom of that table are the ones of highest multiple deprivation in Scotland. Is that a concern to you that the multi-year funding hasn't touched the whole of Scotland and made a bigger impact in its first awards?
So the first thing to say is the introduction of multi-year funded organisations has been able to reach a significantly larger number of organisations and venues that would have been the case in the past. That the number of local authority areas that have multi-year funded organisations of venues has gone up from 21 to 27, and that, as you've just noted, Convener, means there's a small number of local authorities where there are not venues or organisations that have either been successful in their applications or have made applications at all. Does it concern me that there are a small number of local authorities where there are not multi-year funded organisations or venues? Yes, I am, because in other areas where we are seeking to support culture and the arts, I could point to the Youth Music Initiative as a good example. The funding is dispersed in all of Scotland's 32 local authority areas. Now, the difference between those two funding streams and programmes is one is dispersed through education and the educational infrastructure that exists in all local authorities. That's not the case with multi-year funded organisations. That depends on organisations applying for money. One of the things that I think I really caught my attention in the review of Creative Scotland was the opportunity to do more using data, i.e. the understanding of which grants are dispersed and where are they being dispersed and who are they reaching and who are they not reaching, to be able to inform exactly this kind of understanding. Is it the case that in the small number of local authority areas where there are not multi-year funded venues or organisations, is it because none applied? Or is it because some applied and were not successful? And if they were not successful, why were they not successful? Now that is actually the responsibility of Creative Scotland. It's not for me, and there are very strict rules around the role of government and the role of Creative Scotland in this regard. Nevertheless, I'm sure everybody would aspire to seeing cultural organisations and venues being supported right across the country. And I think it's important to bear in mind that the multi-year funded programme is not one which is static. And that's been evidenced by the additional number of organisations and venues that have gone from a supported status, so they didn't make the initial process, then they were supported by Creative Scotland, now they are multi-year funded organisations. So I would be very interested to hear, I don't know, perhaps members have examples of this. I have been asked in the Chamber before about, why is there not a multi-year funded organisation? I have in my memory Willie Rennie asking me about North East Fife. And I said to him, please, can you provide me any information about organisations in North East Fife that have sought to be funded and have not been successful? Because I think we do need to get a better handle on what is it? Is it the fact that organisations have been unsuccessful? In which case, what can be done to support them? Because support has been available. I have in my memory 13 additional organisations or venues went through that phase. So if there are others that are worthy of support and development, in particular in areas where there are not multi-year funded organisations, then I think that should definitely be considered. But I think it's also fair to put on record, Convener, that there are many multi-year funded organisations that operate outside the local authority area in which they are headquartered. So it's not that or an organisation, for example, in Glasgow or Edinburgh or rural parts of Scotland will not also be touring, performing, hiring and so on in other parts of the country. And that, of course, would include those local authority areas which don't currently have a multi-year funded organisation. I would also say that it's worth having a look at the reach of creative communities and the Culture Collective, which are two other particular funding streams that involve projects in different parts of the country and local authority areas as well. So there's a picture that needs to be understood, and I agree with the question that we should better understand why, at a time when we're seeing more organisations being supported in this way than has ever been the case, in more local authorities than has ever been the case, what it is that we can do next to make sure that the success in the overwhelming majority of local authority areas can be enjoyed in all local authority areas.
My clerks have given me a point of clarification, Minister, that you may want to take back. It's not something I want to dwell on today, but ministers are required to respond to pre-budget reports within 5 sitting days from the publication of the budget. So I don't think we got it in that time scale, but I'll leave that there for now. My final question is about the national performing companies who have received standstill funding as a whole this year. The national performing companies, of course, we don't can't speak highly enough of them in this committee in terms of their contribution to the arts and culture. If I take the RSNO in particular, they recently did an economic impact report showing their contribution to the economy in Scotland and vital, but they're saying as a result of the standstill funding that they may have to move from permanent orchestra members to temporary contracts, which they feel will have a dramatic impact on their ability to perform at the level they are at the moment. And I just want to explore why the standstill funding was given this time.
So I join with you and other members in paying tribute to the national performing companies and point to the fact that there has been a shared uplift of £1 million, which follows an uplift of £700,000 in the previous year. So that's a 9.4% uplift since 23-24. And so there's an awareness of the scale of the support for the national performing companies because it is significant. It is almost £25 million shared across the 5 companies. So Scottish Opera receiving £8.64 million, followed by Scottish Ballet on £4.86 million, the National Theatre of Scotland on £4.53 million, Royal Scottish National Orchestra on £4.398 million, and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra on £2.187 million. So the level of support for the national performing companies is significant, and I understand their ambition to want to do more and to not have to make any decisions which doesn't match the ambitions that they have for the years ahead. As I've said to them already, we are now, in effect, 70% through the way of delivering the £100 million additional in the culture space. And the most significant part of that 70% increase has gone towards the delivery of multi-year funding through Creative Scotland. And that is where the £20 million increase of this year has been focused. Were that not to be the case, multi-year funding would not be delivered. So it's really important to understand that is why the priority has been to make sure that this foundational intervention into the culture sector in Scotland, and delivered successfully through Creative Scotland, that multi-year programme has been paid for. That now puts us in a position that we are able to think about the remaining 30%, so that's £30 million of that £100 million uplift. Now, had I been able to deliver a £100 million uplift, which is the biggest increase in culture funding outside COVID since the onset of devolution, had I been able to deliver that in one financial year, then this particular discussion is not one that we would be having today. It's a reflection of the fact that we've been able to increase incrementally year on year towards that £100 million. So I've said to them, and I think I've said it to the committee already, that I am keen to deliver an uplift in spending for our national performing companies. I've also said, because I'm a very, very keen supporter of multi-year funding, I wish to explore doing that for the national performing companies too. Because what multi-year funding does is not only deliver financial certainty, it also allows cultural organisations to get on with what they are wishing to deliver creatively, which is not spending one's time year on year with through annual budget rounds, which is a distraction from both what they want to achieve, but also means that they can't open up potentially new streams of income. And I think that's one of the really exciting areas that we can see with our national performing companies who are able to be imaginative and make more money in different ways. RSNO is a really good example through what they're doing with the film sector. So I've made clear to the national performing companies that we are in a dialogue about how we can best support them with additional funding, delivering what we're delivering in this year's budget, but then thinking about the allocation of the final £30 million towards the £100 million uplift. And we want to understand how they can best be supported as part of that. I want to deliver additional funding to the national performing companies. I understand that they're disappointed that that hasn't happened this year. I would have wished to be able to deliver the £100 million increase in a single year, but that was never a realistic prospect, nor one that we committed to. But what we are doing is we are delivering the £100 million increase within the time frame that we set out, and we have done so already with the Creative Scotland multi-year funding allocation. And I'm very focused on making sure that we, as part of that final stage of allocation, are including the national performing companies in that.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Looking to members who want in. Can I bring Mr Brown in first?
Thanks, Convener. You've mentioned, Cabinet Secretary, and quite rightly, the huge uplift in culture funding in Scotland, not least as compared to England and Wales, and we've all been very supportive of that. You've also mentioned the extent to which it's focused on multi-year funding. Utterly irrelevant to places like Clackmannanshire. They receive nothing at all in terms of multi-year funding. And we had a little hint of it from Creative Scotland, who they've just spoken to, where it was kind of implied this is down to those areas because they can't get their act together and make applications, which I find completely unacceptable. I would hope that Creative Scotland would, and I would certainly hope that the Scottish Government would. Surely it can't be an acceptable situation for the Government, and I understand, of course, the constraints on the Government in terms of specific applications, to have these areas with no funding whatsoever.
So I agree.
I should also add that there are more applications being granted and more money given to organisations out with Scotland from this funding than there have been to 4 local authority areas in Scotland.
So I agree with Mr Brown that we should aspire to have funded organisations and venues in every single local government area. And I would want to understand, to better understand, why it is that some parts of the country have more organisations and venues that are supported than others, including those who have none. And there have been some local authority areas where it is in single digits. So I think that is one of the big takeaways for me from the Creative Scotland review, which pointed to the fact that there is information that can inform us all, yourselves included, so that we can better understand what is the reason for that in different local authority areas. And Mr Brown will have a much better idea than I do about the lie of the land. Were there venues and organisations in Clackmannanshire that applied, yes or no? Were there venues and organisations in Clackmannanshire that put in applications that were unsuccessful? And if that's the case, what is happening with that? Are these potentially viable applications? And if they're potentially viable applications, but for one reason or another failed to, make the initial round of adjudication, in which case, what's been done to help and support these venues and organisations? Now, as I've mentioned to the committee already, this development phase is something that Creative Scotland undertook with the initial round. There were a range of venues and organisations that were not successful, but were deemed worthy of support to help get them in a position so that they would be successful. And that's where I think the intervention, firstly the questioning, so why? Why not Clackmannanshire? Why not the 3 other local authority areas? That's question 1, absolutely right. And that we now should be able to have the data that can help explain that. What is the reason for that? And if it's the case, there's a lack of infrastructure which is on the cusp of being successful, then what do we need to do to support that, to make sure that there is that level of cultural support in every local authority area? So I agree with Mr Brown with the premise of his question. I agree that it's something that we need to be looking at both as government and Creative Scotland. And it is one of the areas we haven't formally responded to the Creative Scotland report yet, but I've already signalled to the committee that this is one particular area where I think the use of data because Creative Scotland will have a lot of it. It'll have data about who all the applicants were, where were the applications from, what is the history of supporting projects in the past, are there people, are there arts workers in Clackmannanshire, are there venues and organisations which apply through other funding streams that might wish to aspire to become multi-year funded organisations, and if not, why not, and what can one be doing about it? So that's one part of the equation. I'll signal another area where I think we do need to think about things, and this was reported back to me through the process of the Creative Scotland review, which is the different attitudes of our enterprise companies towards the culture and arts sector. So if you were looking at organisations and venues in the area that Highlands and Islands Enterprise covers, or South of Scotland Enterprise covers, there's a significant difference in approach between those two enterprise companies and Scottish Enterprise. Now, I'm not suggesting that Scottish Enterprise must become a vehicle for cultural funding. I'm not saying that. But I think we all understand that culture an intrinsic value in itself, but it is also a part of the economy. So why is it then that this is treated as a priority by Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the South of Scotland Enterprise Company, but not in Scottish Enterprise, an area that covers Clackmannanshire? So I think there's a number of questions that need to be asked to a number of organisations that have a responsibility, and the Scottish Government does have a role in its conversations with Creative Scotland, with Scottish Enterprise and others, and I, and as I'm sure the committee, would be very keen to see the data to support an understanding of where is there perhaps an under-provision of culture and the arts, and what can be done about it, because doing nothing, to my mind, is not an option.
Yeah, and I can say in relation to the enterprise companies having previously been responsible for them, I think there is a difference in the remit. I'm not arguing with your point that you made, Cabinet Secretary. There might be a role for Scottish Enterprise to view more broadly cultural initiatives as also economic ones. I understand that point, but I think there is, from memory, HIE was set up with a specific remit to do that, and I'm not sure that Scottish Enterprise was. Although it goes to the point that we made in the committee's request of information about cross-portfolio working in relation to this, and that there's precious little detail that's come back to us about any initiatives being done. There is a little bit, but not much. Going back, though, to the point about Clackmannanshire, I would say it's not down to individual members to provide this information. I could give you a number of people that have just grown weary of making applications to Creative Scotland that don't do it anymore. And in a small place like Clackmannanshire, maintaining an infrastructure without periodic at least success is very difficult. My point is that we're not in year zero. Creative Scotland's been there for 16 years. What do they know? What have they done in relation to Clackmannanshire? Next door neighbour, Stirling, relatively successful, but still well below average in terms of what they get as well. So what is Creative Scotland doing? I don't know what it is the Scottish Government can do, but the Scottish Government should be seized of the need to do something in this area quite urgently. And I know I'm talking about Clackmannanshire, but the other areas, like Western Bartonshire, probably comes, along with Clackmannanshire, at the bottom of most of the deprivation indices that we have in Scotland, and getting nothing at all. I think this is a pressing and urgent problem that both the Scottish Government and especially Creative Scotland should be showing a bit more urgency in relation to dealing with it. Culture is so important. It's no less important to areas of huge deprivation. So I would just be very keen to hear from the committee. I've asked Creative Scotland to provide a pattern of what the grants and support has been over the 16 years of their existence, both for Stirling and for Clackmannanshire, and they've undertaken to do that. But it would be nice to see a joined-up approach with the Scottish Government as to how this can best be addressed urgently.
Well, again, I agree with Mr Brown, and I think it's good to hear that Creative Scotland are going to produce those statistics, and I think there's more data that can be provided beyond that specific 16-year period. I think we need more information, and then what follows from that is to ask, why is it so? to understand, is it because of organisations and their institutional memory is unfortunately marked by a lack of success? Well, that's not a reason to not support cultural organisations and venues, and would point to, in fairness to Creative Scotland, the fact that that is exactly what they did with a number of organisations that didn't make the initial funding round for multi-year funded organisations. The fact that there is an experience in helping organisations and venues get to a place where they can have successful applications is a sign that there's a willingness to do it. So I don't think it's because there's not a willingness to intervene and to make this happen, but I think Mr Brown's absolutely right to put a marker down to say, OK, well, if it's the fact that there are four local authorities where there is nothing or next to nothing, then we need to understand why. We need to understand what's going to happen as a result of that. And we need to know what, within a reasonable timescale of when can people in Clackmannanshire or West Dunbartonshire or wherever else have confidence that local organisations or venues will be funded through these streams. But I would also say, I've mentioned before, Convener, that there are other funding streams through which organisations are supported, and I think one has to look across the piece at all of these. I wanted to satisfy myself about whether that was the case in relation to Culture Collective and creative communities, and I think if Mr Brown were to raise the point, I would have to say to him, I'm not aware of any projects being funded in Clackmannanshire through those routes either. So it's having that overview that then will point to the fact that there is not support through multi-year funding, through Culture Collective, through creative communities. That does look to me like the beginnings of a flashing light of then why not?
Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. If I just say about the North Lanarkshire situation, I was glad to see that there was an effort that was successful to save Cumbernauld Theatre going forward. For my own constituency, Motherwell and Wishaw, we lost our concert hall and theatre, which was absolutely precious to those living in the area and has been for years because of rack in the roof space. So it comes down to capital. I don't want to rehash the capital issues at the moment, but it is having a dramatic impact on some of the venues, as you know, across the country.
Well, it is, but I mean, if I can just briefly say about Cumbernauld, as an example, it is a very strong example of funding not being in place for an organisation and venue, and understanding, because it was put to me very strongly by the constituency member, Jamie Hepburn, that the closure of the likes of Cumbernauld Theatre, the impact that that would have in North Lanarkshire would, much as Mr Brown has been saying about Clackmannanshire, mean that much of the county wouldn't have any provision of this sort. And we were very seized of that. As I think the committee would expect, there is due diligence that needs to take place. There needs to be confidence that organisations or venues are making applications or have plans about how they can trade and that they are able to sustain themselves. Those are very, very important considerations as part of this process, because this is public money. So one has to have confidence that these venues or organisations will be able to deliver what they are applying for, but it's a very current case in point of having an appreciation that with a closure or with a lack of funding for venues or an organisation, the consequences that this has for a particular part of the country, and that's why significant efforts were made to support a future for Cumbernauld Theatre, and that's exactly what's happened. And I would wish, as I've given the commitment to the committee, that we have exactly the same focus throughout the country in those parts where there is an absence of multi-year funded organisations or venues.
Questions from the committee? Can I bring in Mr Kerr?
So, Cabinet Secretary, you rightly pay tribute to the National Performing Companies, but seem reluctant to acknowledge what the consequence of what the convener, I think, rather generously called a standstill budget. In fact, the amount of money being given to the National Performing Companies since 2008 has been on a standstill. I mean, I didn't catch all the numbers you recited at one point during an earlier answer, but I have got the numbers that I think reflect the 26-27 numbers for Scottish Opera. 8.6 million I've got here. In 2008 it was 8.5 million. The RSNO, for example, this year's numbers, I think 4.2 million. In 2008 it was 4.3 million. So by any measurement, 4.3 million for RSNO in 2008 compared with 4.2 in 2026-7. This is a dramatic cut over time in the money that the national performing companies are receiving. And surely, and I know you're someone who appreciates all these aspects of the standard, world-class standard of performance that we get from our national companies, surely you recognise the damage that has been done in recent years and is now going to be further inflicted on the national performing companies, particularly in the light of what the convener disclosed in relation to basically changes in the nature of the contracts of the performers that I don't think philosophically and politically you would even agree with the nature of those contracts. So what are you doing to the national performing companies by the approach you're taking to their funding?
So I would hope that Mr Kerr would acknowledge that any Cabinet Secretary, any portfolio goes through the budget process seeking to draw down as much as is possible through the budget process. And as I've already said to the committee, it would have been an absolute dream to be able to deliver a £100 million increase in the culture and arts sector in 1 year. That would have been tremendous. And then we wouldn't be having this conversation. What we have been able to do is deliver year-on-year increases to the culture and arts sector, and as I hope Mr Kerr would appreciate, the foundational change, and it's a very big ticket price to introduce multi-year funding through Creative Scotland for the record number of organisations that it has. And the challenge for me is to continue delivering the funding, because we have not been able to do that over a year. That would presume that a Parliament would vote for it. It would presume that if people were to want me to redirect funding from one part of the culture budget to another, that people might outline what they do not think is worthy of support. And as I pointed out to the committee, the biggest single item that we are delivering in the increase in this year's culture budget is the part that is absolutely necessary to deliver multi-year funding. So, if we were to redirect resources towards the national performing companies in this financial year, it would be most likely at the cost of multi-year funding, and I'm not prepared to do that. Do I acknowledge, in answer to Mr Kerr's question, that causes challenges to the national performing companies, that they will they may have to make decisions that they consider to be disadvantageous, and also not do things that they would want to do if they had the resources in place. So touring and reaching different parts of the country and all of that. I accept all of that because I'm in regular dialogue with them. I understand what they do. I'm a big supporter of what they do. I want to be able to give them the resources that they require to do what they want to do to reach their full potential as quickly as possible.
I just wanted to get you to acknowledge that your decisions in relation to this funding, it is a continuation of basically the cash amount stayed the same since 2008. In fact, it went backwards for a number of years. It's now kind of catching up, almost, for 2008. I just want you to acknowledge, Cabinet Secretary, because I know you're someone that takes a lot of interest, a lot of interest in that kind of cultural output from our country, world-class cultural output, that your decisions are leading to damage to these esteemed national performing companies. And can I ask you, before you respond to that comment from me, just to tell us what is the amount of money you may need an official to give you this, and I accept that completely. How much money is there in the International Touring Fund for 2026-27? Or has it been closed?
So, colleagues will look that number up when as I begin to answer your question, Mr. Kerr, and then somebody will row in and give me a number. So, firstly, on the challenge for the national performing companies in the wider context of what we're trying to do in transforming culture funding across the piece. I've said before, it is a bit like turning a tanker. It is something that takes time. I agree with Mr. Kerr. I would love to be able to do it all in a oneer. It is just not possible to do that. And if anybody were able to say to me, here is the route through which we could make that happen quicker, I'm all ears. I remember it's not that long ago that I was being called on to deliver a £20 million increase in one recent year, because that was absolutely what was required. And I was pleased to be able to deliver more than £30 million in that particular year, and that has helped deliver the change that we have seen through multi-year funding. I acknowledge to Mr. Kerr, as I have acknowledged to the national performing companies, they have not yet seen the increase that they would wish and I would wish. They have not seen an introduction of multi-year funding for our national performing companies that they would want to see and I will want to see. But I want to give Mr. Kerr a very direct assurance that that is absolutely at the top of my list of priorities as we move towards the delivery of the last 30% of our committed increase in culture funding. And I will be delighted to come back to the committee when we are doing so.
I just would point out to those who might be watching or listening or reading the proceedings of this committee that you are responsible for a budget of £416 million. And I would have thought, given your personal interest, which I acknowledge, that somehow you might have been able to be more generous and to break the cycle, which has lasted almost the entirety of the period of the SNP in government, where these national performing companies are basically short-changed even against basic increases, such as, for example, the national employers' national insurance contribution increases, which we both bemoan. That doesn't, the money that they've had in increases last year, this year, doesn't even cover that. So that is the reality. Did you have an answer for the...
So I do have an answer. The answer is £471,000. But going back to the point about delivering increases in culture funding, I am committed to doing this.
Yeah.
We are doing it, and the national performing companies are at the top of my list.
I'm making special pleading.
Okay.
And for reasons that I think he and I might agree on, which is fundamentally the standard of excellence that the national performing companies give us is inspirational to the whole sector.
Yep.
And therefore they play a leadership role in the sector.
I agree with them.
And cutting off or reducing, because that's effectively what we're doing, cutting off that funding is to the detriment of Scotland's cultural sector, global reputation, in my opinion. Can I ask him, because I know we're running out of time, aren't we?
If you're quick, Mr. Kerr.
I acknowledge that there's lots of questions I'd like to ask, and like last week, I will probably have to write a letter. But I wanted to talk to you about the Level 4 spreadsheet, worksheet for the budget. I wanted to ask you about the narratives against the numbers. I also wanted to check with you and confirm with you that the amounts of money that are mentioned at Level 4 that I queried in the Chamber of the Scottish Parliament back on the 14th of January are correct. Can I just ask you to confirm that there will be an additional £100,000 for the Scottish Library and Information Council, that there will be £500,000 for film houses in Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen, that there's £1.2 million for something called an Expo Fund, maybe you can say something about that very briefly, and £600,000 for the proposed new Museum of Empire, Slavery, Colonialism and Migration. Can you confirm that funding along with the funding that's identified in the worksheet for Screen Scotland. And the reason I ask that is because you rightly pointed out in a letter to the convener in response to my point of order that, that you were at risk of breaking legal provisions in the Public Services Reform Scotland Act 2010 by becoming involved in giving direction in relation to artistic or cultural judgment in terms of the money that you are awarding. Can I ask you who wrote the narratives?
Responsibilities for what appears from the government rest with ministers. But as I've acknowledged in communication to the committee, and I heard Mr Kerr's point of order, is that these numbers and the numbers that he mentions are correct. Happy to confirm the others, but I think the committee has the full list. These are numbers that I expected to be published as part of the budget process, and they were. But that there were edits that were undertaken, not to the numbers, but in terms of the presentation of which were undertaken by civil servants. I was unaware of the necessity for the edits to take place. They took place, and the numbers and the detail were restored. So would I have wished that was not necessary? Yes, because members like Mr Kerr quite rightly asking why. But this is an administrative reason. It's not anything to do with the allocation of resources through the other arts budget line, which totals just over £16 million. In relation to the question of artistic and cultural judgment, it is not the place for myself as Cabinet Secretary to involve myself in the work of Creative Scotland and its responsibility around the funding of organisations. That it is for them to make these sort of decisions, and that is what they do. But there are a range of other directly funded interventions that the Scottish Government quite properly undertakes that will impact on all sorts of cultural areas. That's the balancing act. I get advice from officials about here is what is required. Does one feel that the balance is right to try and make sure we're doing we're covering all of the areas that we want to cover? And then, no doubt, there will be a view that there's too much here or too less there.
I just wanted to make the point because of time and the need for brevity, and I will conclude just by saying that the way that the narratives are written, there was a clear risk, which you acknowledged, Cabinet Secretary, of it being interpreted in the way that I'm suggesting it was, in terms of Section 40 of the Act. And the fact that you mentioned that is what has led me to ask these questions, because we all know, because we are in the business of words, that the way we talk about things and the way we write about things often betrays the way we think about things. And I wanted to test, as I have this morning, and I will leave it at this, as to whether or not the Section 40 legal requirement not to give directions had in fact even subconsciously been breached in the way that the budget was presented. I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says, but I wanted to put this on the record that there is a clear legal responsibility on the Cabinet Secretary not to get to the level of specificity that there was a risk of the narrative in Level 4 worksheet leading one to presume what was happening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, forgive me, Convener. With your permission, there's a part of Mr Kerr's question that I didn't answer, where he was asking about the Festivals Expo Fund.
Oh, yes, sorry.
With your permission. So the Festivals Expo Fund supports Scottish artists to showcase their work and develop international connections through Scottish festivals. Over £30 million has been distributed by Creative Scotland through the Festivals Expo Fund since its inception in 2007 to festivals in Edinburgh, and from 2018 onwards, festivals in Glasgow.
Okay. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'd like to ask about 3 separate issues, so I'll try to be quite tight on each one. We've just had Creative Scotland with us on the previous panel, and myself and another member were both asking about the Centre for Contemporary Arts in Glasgow. You'll obviously have been very aware, and in fact, according to press reports, you were aware some days before the news broke that the CCA was going into liquidation. I was first of all putting it to Ian Munro, and he appeared to agree that while there are obviously going to be questions about the CCA as an organisation and how things got to where they are, that mustn't be a barrier to bringing the building back into use as a cultural facility for Glasgow and giving it a new lease of life. Mr Munro seemed to agree with that. I'd like to make the argument that parachuting in management consultants and the like hasn't been a very successful approach, and that the idea of an organisation rooted in the cultural and artistic community and its values is far more likely to navigate some of the pressures, including some of the external tensions that have been problematic in recent times for the CCA. And I asked Mr Munro if he would explore with the board the option of a worker-led approach, reaching out to those staff who just lost their jobs, exploring their interest and capacity in taking something forward, and being directly involved in a new organisation that would bring the building back to life. And as Creative Scotland is both funder and landlord, they're in a very strong position to help make that happen. Can I ask for your support in at least exploring that option of a more worker-led future for the CCA, and whether that would be more successful in navigating some of the pressures that have been problematic in recent years?
Well, I'm in favour of Creative Scotland exploring all options to make sure that the CCA is in a position to reopen as soon as is realistically possible. I think it's a matter of public record that it has had financial and governance challenges, but there have been significant efforts both from Creative Scotland and authorities in Glasgow to try and see what is a very important artistic institution for Glasgow and Scotland, and beyond Scotland too, that it continues. They are going to have to find a way forward, and if Creative Scotland are hearing, and I'm sure they'll be reading the transcript of the evidence session, because this is something for Creative Scotland to take forward, and we know all of the provisos about arm's length and all of that. But I'm certain that they will want to explore all options to best understand what is the viable future for something as a very valued cultural institution.
But as a government that believes in fair work and recognises the challenges in creating a fair work culture within the culture and creative industries, and why that's very difficult, surely there's a strong argument for saying that the people who've just lost their jobs, not only on a point of justice for them, but retaining the skills and experience that they have, there ought to be some prominent role for them, or at least reaching out to them to see if that can be made possible.
Anything that will help the viability and sustainability of an organisation like the Centre for Contemporary Arts is something that should be considered, and one shouldn't be losing any of the experience that there has been in such an important institution. I very much hope that as soon as it is practicably possible, because we are talking about people's jobs here, Mr Harvey, I'm sure would agree with me on this, given the precarious nature of many people, particularly those in the freelance sector in culture and the arts, this has to be a priority. I agree with that. It must be a priority. But given the history that there has been around governance issues and finance, that in seeking the reopening of the Centre for Contemporary Arts as a priority, one is going to have to look at all of the options so that it is viable, because at the end of the process, the priorities that Mr Harvey has addressed in terms of the very talented people who have worked at the CCA, it's also the case that there has to be financial viability of the organisation, and I'm sure that everybody at Creative Scotland who are taking this forward will be seized of that. And I say again, as I did in my initial answer, I'd be very keen for them to explore all options, because it is in everybody's interests that the venue reopens, that the talented people who work there are able to continue what they do, and I would wish to be as supportive as I can be in that endeavour.
Okay, the national performance companies, performing companies, I'll just follow up on some of the points that were raised already. I don't think there's any need for kind of defensiveness on this. I think everybody who's taking this issue seriously recognises that the 100 million was never going to be delivered in a single tranche, and that even in a portfolio with a rising budget, the demands rise every bit as quickly to say that there are more ways that budget could be used than money is available. So there are always going to be pressures, even with a rising budget. It's the lack of clarity about the trajectory for the future that I think is the big issue. I'd love to see an increase in the current year, but my understanding is that even if that wasn't possible, some greater clarity about what's coming in the years ahead will help to avoid forcing them into some very damaging decisions. Now, in the Chamber, I put that argument to you. Will you offer some concrete clarity about the funding trajectory? And you said, I can give Mr Harvey that assurance. Those conversations have already been had with the NPCs. And then you later said you want them to have as much clarity as possible about that, and that's what you want to give them. And then last week we heard from Stephen Roth, recognition of that discussion, and yes, he said, I'm glad Mr Harvey received that assurance from the Cabinet Secretary, because it gives us a bit of assurance too. So can I ask specifically, what assurance have you been able to give to the NPCs about what they will receive in the coming years, if the current government is returned and continues with the funding trajectory set out in the spending review? What level of increase are they able to expect, and how can they build that into their financial plans for the year ahead?
So, I mean, Mr Harvey is absolutely right to recount that the conversations have already taken place with the national performing companies involving myself, but in fairness, it's also my officials who have ongoing discussions with national performing companies as well. So it's not just about clarity about the direction of travel, and I think I have been very clear about my expectations of and where my priorities lie in relation to the increase in next year's budget to the national performing companies, and that I want to I am a very keen supporter of multi-year funding. So on both of these counts, I am wanting to make I'm wanting to give as much clarity as I can that that is the direction of travel. I can't make a commitment today about exact numbers and the exact format, but what I have said to the national performing companies is that this has to emerge from a process involving them. So that is what we're at the beginnings of, is a process involving the different national performing companies, because they have different needs, interests, concerns and expectations. Yes, there's the general question about what the baseline is, and year on year, what does that mean? In a changing environment, incidentally, where some of our national performing companies have become very much more commercially successful. But we need an ordered process through which we can understand how support can be best allocated to the national performing companies. That is the process that has begun.
And are you confident that that process that's begun will enable them to avoid making immediate changes of the kind that we've been warned about, such as moving to a freelance model instead of a salaried model?
Well, I very much hope that. This kind of discussion is exactly the same as we have had in recent years, given pressures elsewhere in the culture sector. It's been the case with national collections, for example, around national museums and others, where people have perhaps not had the allocation that they require in year, but need assurances, in some organisations' case around staff and staff pay, to be able to report to board members, to trustees, to people who have fiduciary responsibilities. And as Mr Harvey, I'm sure, will appreciate, this is not a simple thing. For a government to commit to something in a forward budgetary process, so we have, for example, with multi-year funding, we were able to confirm what we were going to deliver in 1 year, in the first year of multi-year funding, and what the intention was in year 2, and that was also very much in the space of helping people have the degree of assurance that this, in as much as can be committed in the next year, and Mr Harvey has pointed to the additional reality that we need to be cognizant of, which is that we have an election. I can only speak for my own party in relation to what commitments might be given, and I would encourage all colleagues in all political parties in their manifestos to commit with the same degree of commitment that my party will, and that will help given maximum clarity, maximum assurance, so that no decisions that are avoidable need to be taken by the national performing companies or anybody else.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll want to keep the committee updated as those conversations progress. I wanted to ask one final question. I'll try and make it brief. It's on the external affairs part of your portfolio. Now, obviously, there won't be unanimity across the committee about the Scottish Government's external affairs engagement. There'll be those who seem to question whether it should happen at all. I think there's a clear majority in Parliament for the backing of a strong and an assertive approach to external affairs by the Scottish Government. But I'd like to understand what's going on with the budget, in not just in the 26-27 year, but in the spending review as well, because it's going up in 26-27 from 26.7 million that was budgeted for, slightly lower in the outturn, up to 34.5 in the budget for 26-27. But in the spending review, it then shows a decline for each of the subsequent 2 years. Now, obviously, the spending review is a bit of a first draft. It's not a fixed, committed budget, and it may change as we go forward in the next couple of years. But can you give us an understanding of why there's an increase in 1 year followed by a couple of decreases?
So I fear I'm going to have to write to Mr Harvey about the spending review period. On the external affairs budget across the piece, there are some minor changes that relate, amongst other things, to property and lease arrangements as part of the network. And that can cause in-year changes for what is required when there's a rollover of a lease, for example, and one has to pay something in the first year, but then not in the same amount in the second year. I have that in my memory as being one of the contributory factors to some of these changes in the external affairs budget. And Mr Harvey will be aware that the Scottish Government has a very strong presence in London, and similarly has facilities in Brussels which are not on platform as it's known, being part of the UK embassy setup, which is the case in the other places where the network is located. But I'll write with some detail through you, convener, so that Mr Harvey has that, as does the rest of the committee.
That would be appreciated. I think we're in a changing world with changing pressures and opportunities and threats that Scotland faces, and I think in future years, I think it's clear that there should be a continued strong commitment by the Scottish Government, not only to things like international development aid, but also to ensuring Scotland's voice is heard on the world stage.
Yeah, so I agree with...
the Cabinet Secretary. I'm going to move on because I've got 3 other members still waiting to come in. I'm sure you can address your points in the letter that will be shared with the committee. Thank you very much. Can I bring in Jamie Harcourt-Johnson, please?
Thanks very much. I'll be quick and I'll be grateful for brief answers as well, Cabinet Secretary. Just to kind of follow up briefly on some of the areas that Patrick Harvey covered on. Stephen Roth, who came in last week, talked about managed decline. He warned about the current funding settlement essentially leaving, in the future, Scottish Ballet potentially only operating in the central belt. Lucy Casso from Museum and Gallery Scotland says it is really challenging and pretty dire in some cases. I asked her about whether museums were focused on literally just keeping the lights on and the doors open, and if there was any change in that. She said if there is change, it has been going in the wrong direction and getting worse. That's not a huge amount of confidence within the sector, and is that not is that a picture that you recognise in terms of the concerns of some pretty senior people?
I have no reason to disbelieve the concerns that colleagues have in national performing companies and elsewhere, as was the case with other parts of the culture sector in preceding years, and that's why the government has done what it has done, which is committed to the biggest increase in culture funding since the beginning of devolution and outside COVID recovery. And I want to be able to deliver the resources to the national performing companies and others, and we've been doing so in terms of museums and galleries, and for example the Museums Fund, which has been introduced and has been very warmly welcomed by the sector and is making a difference already. So there are interventions in place in some of the areas that Mr Harcourt-Johnson has raised, but in terms of the national performing companies, I acknowledge, as I have to other members on the committee, that they look forward to an increase in their funding for reasons which I totally understand, and I'm committed to helping deliver.
Do you recognise, though, that the confidence that this will be delivered, and you've highlighted it will be over a longer period, is somewhat maybe impacted by promises in the past that then occasionally led to budget cuts within the sector and then budget reinstatements? How do you think that kind of approach has impacted on confidence?
Well, I think the fact that we're at having delivered 70%, so £70 million of the increase towards £100 million should give people commitment, should give people confidence that we are delivering on the aspirations of the increase in the culture sector. But that in itself is only the revenue side of the picture, which I'm sure Mr Harcourt-Johnson would acknowledge. And one can look at other specific projects which are a major boost to confidence in the sector. If we look at what's happening with the Dinard Centre, if we're looking at what's happening with the Artworks project, if we're looking at what's happening at the King's Theatre, if we look at what's already been delivered for the Citizens Theatre, there are a whole lot of areas where there has been significant intervention by the Scottish Government that not only is giving people confidence, is actually providing amazing venues. And in the case of the Artworks project, it's going to be absolutely groundbreaking in terms of how Scotland's national treasures are going to be housed and are going to be open to the public. So these are things which are happening. Do I acknowledge that we are not yet? Have we delivered on the 100% of the £100 million increase that we have committed to? No, we're not there yet, but we're 70% of the way there. And with the encouragement both of the likes of national performing companies and members of this committee and others to make sure that we will get there.
One of the areas that Ian Munro, I don't know if you saw his evidence just now, but one of the areas that he talked about, it's one of the areas you highlighted, the Youth Music Initiative, and we talked about the impact of the squeeze on local government as well. And he talked about a fragility within the local government side of cultural funding, that fewer cultural strategies in local government than there were before, and that's obviously an area. And he highlighted, particularly regards to the MYF, that the cuts around, or the squeezes around local government budgets were deeply worrying and could be undermining the progress of the Youth Music Initiative. So do you have concerns that out with your own budget, squeezes on, say, local government budgets are impacting on the cultural sector, and how will you be able to work with cross-government to ensure that those cuts don't impact as badly as certainly some within the sector are concerned about?
So the first thing is working with local government. So we'd want to give Mr Halcrow-Johnson the assurance that that is indeed ongoing. I have met not that long ago with the culture conveners of local authorities, so those people who are responsible for the provision of culture by local authorities of all parties and none, where there was a shared commitment to maintaining cultural infrastructure, that which is delivered currently.
And what concerns did they raise with you?
Well, as with all things, funding is important for local government, amongst other things, and I was able to point to the increased funding that is being delivered for local authorities. And we do have to work in partnership with local authorities to make sure that the entirety of the country does have a provision of cultural service, which goes back to the initial question by Mr Brown. But in this particular area, and Mr Halcrow-Johnson began his question with the Youth Music Initiative, it's a good example of where cultural intervention by the Scottish Government is leading to its delivery in every single local government area. I would also draw his attention to something which is new, which is the Youth Arts Open Fund, which is based on the YMI model, but for other art forms. So not only do we have a model which the Scottish Government is delivering right across the country, but we're trying to broaden its range to include other art forms. Will there be an ongoing conversation with local authorities and the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities in general about making sure that provision is retained right across the country? Yes, there is, and that will continue. But I'm happy to confirm that conversation is a positive one, with a commitment on both sides that we're wanting to deliver across Scotland.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, given the evidence that we received from one of your own SNP colleagues who was representing COSLA in terms of the impact of the settlement and the positivity of it, then they'd necessarily agree. Just my last question, very quickly. Just Creative Scotland, obviously, we were speaking to them earlier. They talked about we were talking about the transformation plan. There wasn't one, but they were talking about perhaps the action and what needed to be happened. Are you confident that Creative Scotland have taken on board the recommendations of the review, that they are working to address some of the issues around transparency, strategic priorities, etc., and that they are that you're confident that you're able to properly see what's going on in that organisation, and you're happy with the direction?
So the review is relatively new on the desk of colleagues at Creative Scotland, as it is for me. I have already had conversations with Creative Scotland and received assurances about the approach that they'll be taking in relation to the review and its proposals, and they will be working on it as the Scottish Government is in terms of what we can do. It's not all on Creative Scotland, most of it is, but there is some of it which is on the Scottish Government too. So the question was, do I have confidence in colleagues taking things as seriously? I take everybody at their word, and the assurances that I've had, not just embrace the opportunity that this change offers them, but I think there's a really exciting prospect that because multi-year funding is now up and running, an organisation that has been geared to an annual process of significant staff resource is freed up.
Can I just ask the last question? How will you be overseeing that? How will you be benchmarking that? And how will you be publishing those benchmarks and that oversight?
Well, I mean, the first thing is in partnership with Creative Scotland. In terms of how we can report back, I need to take a view on our response to the review. I've received it positively. I've said that. So I think that it's a strong signal to the committee that we will be trying to do as much as we can that we have been advised to do. And I look forward to seeing Creative Scotland's detailed feedback on those points. When
would you expect those by? When would you expect to see that detailed feedback?
I don't have a timeline in front of me, Mr Halcrow-Johnson, but this is not something that should be taking much longer. The review has already concluded. So I would definitely hope that I can share my views before the election, before we get into Purdah. That would be my personal hope. If there's any reason that that's not possible, I'll let him and the committee know.
Okay, thank you.
But I agree that momentum is important as part of this process.
Okay. Can I bring in Mr Bibby, please?
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to raise the national performing companies again because I think there is a great deal of cross-party support and concern about the potential impact that the funding situation will have on the national performing companies. I do think there was obviously quite a lot of spin earlier in your statements about the funding situation. Mr Kerr did the comparison with 2012. I mean, Scottish Opera in this year's budget has proposed a real terms cut, National Theatre of Scotland a real terms cut, Royal Scottish National Orchestra real terms cut, and Scottish Chamber Orchestra a real terms cut. Would you accept that's the case? I mean, you didn't mention that earlier, but there's 4 out of the 5 national performing companies are facing a real terms cut.
So I acknowledge that there has not been a substantive increase in the funding for the national performing companies.
Can we just cut to the chase? Can we just you say substantial increase? I know that's your spin. Real terms cuts to 4 out of 5 of the organisations. We don't need a lengthy
So
answer.
I've already outlined to the committee the numbers and the amount of financial support and where there have been increases.
Yeah, but
I've already said that.
No, but you didn't say that there was a real terms cut.
Sorry, I'm not going to have words put in my mouth. I've said to the committee what the numbers are.
4 out of the 5 organisations.
I've said, I think Mr Bibby was here at the start of the evidence session when I confirmed the numbers to the committee,
and I
also took the opportunity to say that in terms of delivering the remainder of the £30 million uplift, one which we are delivering in excess of the calls of opposition parties, including Mr Bibby.
Do they represent the real terms cut?
My focus in the next budgetary cycle is for the national performing companies.
Do they represent a real terms cut for 4 out of 5 organisations this coming? Yes or no?
I've already answered the question and provided the detailed numbers, which includes increases for the national performing companies. Is it everything that they would wish? No. Is it everything that I would wish? No. However, is it something that I am focused on in the budgetary cycle to provide an increase for the national performing companies? Yes, it is. Is it under discussion with the national performing companies? Yes, it is. And am I trying to do that in a multi-year funded context? Yes, I am.
Well, Stephen Roth of Scottish Ballet said last week your comments in Parliament around increased funding are not reflective of the reality, and obviously the reality is there. 4 out of the 5 organisations facing real terms cut, and Scottish Ballet are surviving on static funding and escalating costs. Obviously, there is a great deal of support for the national performing companies and what they do. You said you pay tribute. I think they want you to pay them cash, not just pay them tribute. You said you're keen to provide them an uplift. I welcome that. You said you're looking at multi-year funding. I welcome that, and I'm sure colleagues across the committee would welcome that. But not this year. This budget settlement is done. There's not going to be any revisions to the budget given to national performing companies this year.
So the government doesn't have any plans, and it hasn't received any detailed proposals from any political party, including the Scottish Labour Party, for there to be a change to the budgetary process. If Mr Bibby wishes to confirm a detailed proposal, I'd be happy to look at it. So if Mr Bibby wants to send me his workings about where he would wish to see cuts elsewhere in the culture budget and how that can be reallocated, I await that with keen interest.
Well, on that, I'll bring out the budget, George. Because in your budget, external affairs, advice and policy, the budget line for that is increasing by 31%, from 5.4 million to 7.1 million. And the 7.1 million is actually more than all the national performing companies get except Scottish Opera. There's been a significant increase in external affairs, advice and policy. Now, you used to use the phrase earlier that the national performing companies are top of your list. But the amount of money you're spending on external affairs and advice and policy is going up 31%. That suggests that's top of your list, not the national performing company.
So I think this is as the subject of correspondence.
£7.1 million on that.
This is the subject of correspondence that I've had with Mr Bibby, who I think didn't understand where the funding was going to, but now he does know. So if Mr Bibby is asking that we should be cutting population services migration, something that matters to the Scottish economy, or if he's asking for us to cut the civil service capacity to deal with climate change issues, that would be very interesting to see the detail of it, because what Mr Bibby is drawing attention to is a change in civil service accounting from one portfolio to another. It's standard practice, convener, as you will be aware, an example of which events moved out of the culture portfolio area, and these two particular areas moved into the accounting provision for the portfolio. To suggest that this is some sort of bloated administrative area which shouldn't be spent on, I think will be new to people who care about issues related to policy on population migration or indeed climate change. But again, if Mr Bibby wants to write to me with the detail of how he proposes to deal with the ending of this provision, important provision for the Scottish Government, I'd very much look forward to seeing the detail of that rather than the sound bites or a press release.
It's very interesting. You talked about the need to protect the civil service capacity there. Of course, the Finance Secretary, your colleague in the Scottish Government Cabinet, has talked about reducing the headcount in the Scottish Government officials. So from your answer there, can I just take it that external affairs and advice and policy will be totally protected in terms of civil service headcount numbers? So, just to be clear, because the Cabinet Secretary for Finance suggesting the overall numbers are going down, you're saying this budget can't be touched at all.
Yeah, so we've already gone through a process, as we do right across government, to make sure that we are trying to be as efficient, as effective as we can be without cutting core areas of responsibility in which the government has to have a capacity, because we have a responsibility to deliver on these things. So we have already made those kind of decisions, including in this portfolio area. But if members and their political parties would wish there to be changes in the process, we are going through a budget process. So if Mr Bibby or other colleagues are wanting to see changes, they should account for it. They should bring it to the Chamber and let's talk about it. Let's see the workings. Let's see what areas other political parties don't want to go forward as part of the process. I am here to give evidence, convener, about the Scottish Government's proposals for this budgetary process, which can be amended, of course. Let's see those proposals and then let's have a vote on them. And I'm confident that we have managed to reach a balanced solution in my portfolio area, which is delivering on the responsibilities that I have, and in most significant part is delivering on the biggest single increase in culture and arts spending in Scotland since devolution and out with COVID. And I want to make sure that we complete that, and I've acknowledged that the national performing companies are the top of my list as we move towards the completion of that process. If other members wish to see different priorities, please make the proposals, let's see the workings, and then we can take a view on that in the Parliament.
Mr Bibby, I'm sorry, this is going to be my last chance because I want to bring Mr Adam in.
I got one question.
Oh no, I was going to give Mr Bibby one. Did you have another question, Mr Bibby?
I've got many more questions, but I'll take the opportunity to take one last question. Just go back to that point you said. You repeated that the national performing companies are top of your list. Obviously, doesn't look that way at the moment. But you said you challenged other parties to provide their workings and their details. I think, in terms of you're saying that the national performing companies can expect to get additional money when you, if and when you fulfil your commitment to the extra £100 million. How much of that money will they expect? If it's top of the list, how much money can they expect from that?
Well, I'm delighted that Mr Bibby is predicting a Scottish National Party victory in the Scottish
verging into political point scoring here, Mr Bibby. I think you've made your point. I'm going to move to Mr Adam. Sorry, Mr Adam.
Thanks for the question.
I'm sorry, you had a supplementary earlier, and I forgot to come to you, Mr Harvey moved on. So
Mr Bibby saw an oncoming truck and walked right in front of that one there, Cabinet Secretary. But basically, I'd like to ask the question is that I don't claim to be a culture vulture. I'm a big daft boy for Figi in Paisley, you know. So when I heard the national performing companies coming along to us, there's a balance to be had, surely. I had workings with the RSNO many years ago when I worked for a car manufacturer where we sponsored them, and they did a lot of movie work at the time as well. But there's a balance between them getting the money that they obviously clearly get from yourselves and the Scottish Government, and the external monies that they look at as well. And we heard last week from the National Ballet, Scottish Ballet, where they actually said that, oh, we could end up doing the Nutcracker all the time. I suppose if you looked at Scottish Opera, that would be, you'd be doing Madame Butterfly all the time. But the RSNO, the proms, the Scottish proms are probably one of the most successful times that they do. Surely these are entry points for people to actually get involved in these various organisations, and at the same time can be quite profitable as well, because my concern is, yes, things are challenging for everyone out there. Yes, the budget, you've been able to prioritise them in the budget as well, but surely there's a two-way street here. And I didn't, last week in the evidence, I never heard, much like the Labour Party, Mr Bibby, not putting any budget ideas forward. I never heard any ideas about what they can actually do differently as well, and I would think there's a commercial aspect to this as well, and I find it quite difficult when someone says, oh, we'll be doing the Nutcracker every single time, because as far as I'm concerned, many of my constituents, that's probably a part of their what they do in ballet that they would want to go and see, you know, and it's an entry point for them as well.
So I think Mr Adam is right to talk about the wider benefits that the national performing companies provide, and that they have the commercial opportunity to grow. One thing that we haven't addressed is the wider benefits of culture and the arts, and in this, the national performing companies play a leading role. So take, for example, what they do in education and outreach. All of them are best in class in what they are aspiring to, but what they are already delivering. So If I can go through a couple of them just so I can acknowledge this, and this is on the record. Scottish Ballet, launching itself as a national centre for dance health. Scottish Opera, in terms of the long COVID resources that it has provided. The RSNO, in terms of its school programme. Scottish Chamber Orchestra, its residency in Craigmillar. So that's talking about communities that might not traditionally feel that they have a connection with the national performing companies or what they perform. Or the National Trust for Scotland, in terms of its schools programme. Our national performing companies do a lot to reach out educationally, culturally, societally, and in a health context. Mr Harvey and I were at a meeting last night in terms of the intervention that our cultural sector has on the health of the nation, on the benefit that it has. There was a contribution from an academic in London that was able to share the impact that this has, so not just environmentally in terms of people feeling a bit better, but actually being able to find metrics that demonstrate the impact that culture has. And our national performing companies play a leading role in that. So this is one of the reasons why I am so seized in delivering the resources, so they're able to not just do this, but do more.
Really sorry, we're over time for people getting to chamber, so I'm going to draw things to a close. You've offered to give considerable extra information to the committee. We look forward to hearing that. If any members have any other requests regarding today's session, can they please feed them through the clerks, because we don't have time for a private session this morning. And on that note, I close this committee.